Those gathered may be seated. Friends at home, good morning. My oldest brother, whose name is Jim, is affectionately known as Trooper. He is 6 years older than I think. And he has, throughout his life, been reasonably nice to me. And then in moments of childhood, not so much. I'm recounting his teenage years when I was just a grade school child. And he and his friends, in the midst of the frenzy of the 1970s, headed off to the drive-in movie theater where the film The Exorcist was playing. Needless to say, in my Sunday school educated awareness of things like demons and possessions, my brother thought it would be funny if he would record while at the drive-in theater on audio only the narrative or the description or the words, the sounds of this movie, The Exorcist. And he came home late that night and decided that this would be a terrific big brother, little brother moment. And he began to play the sound of that horrible movie and the horrific Hollywood version of what a demonic possession might sound like. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink that night, and I'm pretty sure that I haven't slept since. So, to my oldest brother, who I know does not watch, but my mother does, I'm going to sue you. I do have a question, however. A question that comes from a fear-filled place. What possesses you? What possesses you? And in that possession, what name does that which possess you call you? For that is what's happening in our gospel lesson today. Jesus, in the very first chapter of Mark, gets on with the proclamation of a newfound kingdom that he has been enfleshed and embodied to bring. And into the synagogue he goes with authority. And it is the scribes that he is engaging. It is the scribe's job in the synagogue to teach the law and the prophets. And it is the scribe's role in Jesus' time to interpret the law and the prophets in a relevant and meaningful way. What is it about this engagement with the scribes that the kingdom would like us to hear? There in the synagogue is a person who is possessed. And Jesus, looking at that possession, says, or they say to Jesus, first, they recognize who Jesus is. And they, perhaps as the scholars suggest, they, in our story, take on the voice of the scribes. Because the question for the scribes is, what possesses you? The voice of the demoniac says to Jesus, what are you doing here? Have you come to take our voice? We know who you are. You are the Holy One. So for a moment, take it on, and perhaps take on what the scholars suggest. Is this the voice of the scribes, whose role it is to interpret the law and the prophets and to make it meaningful in the synagogues as the people of God gather? And what is it that Jesus is saying then to that demoniac voice who is speaking on behalf of the scribes in this story? What is it that they are teaching? That Jesus comes with authority to cast out. You see, in Mark's gospel from chapter 1, what Mark's gospel is inviting us to understand is that from the beginning of Jesus' ministry, Jesus has come to be a liberator. And what the scribes and those in authority in Jesus' day were teaching was oppression and bondage. It was full of their own understanding of nationalism. It was full of their own understanding of racism. It was full of their own understanding of power and their need to protect their place in a moment of time. They had traveled far from what is found in the Hebrew Scriptures. That is, from the very beginning of time, the God who created them was the God who liberated them. And they had woven through the law and the prophets a narrative that set the righteous on high, who just happened to be them, and then everyone else who had to work hard and, oh, by the way, pay their taxes to the temple. Far away, found in the law and the prophets, was the vision for God's love and justice and mercy for the poor, for the brokenhearted, for the broken in spirit, for the lame and the blind. And so in chapter 1, Jesus names that what's happening in the synagogue in that time is demonic. Is demonic. And so the demoniac takes on the voice of the scribes. Have you come, Jesus, to cast us out? You betcha. You betcha I have, says Jesus, teaching with authority, an authority far greater than the one that they had falsely claimed. We know who you are, Jesus, and he says to them, no, demoniac, you don't get to name me. I get to name you. And the jig is up. And you're out. Because the kingdom that I have come to proclaim sets people free. Friends, what possesses you? Do the things or the narratives or the allegiances or the possessions, literal, material things that you have surrounded yourself with, or the ideologies that you have lined yourself up with, do they possess you? And there is one simple question that we all have to ask. Are our hearts held bondage by things that are full of prejudice or full of bias or make our hearts less generous or make our souls less imaginative? Are we literally in an imprisonment of self-content? Or do we desire to be free? and to live free, and to love one another freely in a way that brings justice and mercy and kindness and sight to the blind and a leap in the lame and food in hungry bellies and shelter for those who are in the cold and hope for those who may be in despair. Friends, it's a legitimate question, what possesses us? What possesses us? There is a full-on frontal attack in the world in which we live, and it's historically always been true. There are narratives that invite us into our own oppression. And there are narratives that invite us to be co-conspirators, quiet or otherwise, to keep others oppressed. At the door of this synagogue, of this place of prayer, stands Jesus this day and every day. And this Jesus comes, and this Jesus hears the voice. Why have you come, Jesus? Well, I've come to set you free. Jesus has come to set us free. What is your name? And who is doing the naming? When you hear your name called, do you hear the name of one who has been set free? Friends, we have work to do. If we are in this moment of time where we are self-checking, maybe even fact-checking ourselves. And I think all of us, when we're honest, have a whole lot of fact-checking to do. All of us. What is the risk of being possessed? The critical number one risk is unbelief. Lost belief. Lost belief in the principles of freedom, spiritual and otherwise. An unbelief in ourselves. An unbelief in humanity. An unbelief that the bigger constructs, the bigger things that need to be figured out in our world, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and God knows in our country, the bigger things that we need to figure out. If possessed by the cloud of angels that are the angels of bigotry and darkness and disbelief, if we lose our belief that anything can change, if we lose our belief that love, at the end of the day, cannot transform all, then, my friends, the answer is pray. Pray. Step number one, pray. And I don't mean the kind of prayer where we say to ourselves, I'm just going to hand it all over to some other person, or I'm just going to hand it over to God because God's going to cover it all. No. I'm talking about the gut check prayer. The kind of prayer where you get on your knees. Because, by the way, it is on your knees that you admit that you've got some fact-checking to do. And that you're humble enough to go there. I'm talking about the kind of prayer that the scholar Chad Myers calls the difficult prayer of understanding. And that takes work. It's the kind of prayer that Jesus prayed in the garden before he went to the cross, where he prayed so hard that it is said he sweat blood from his face. We're talking about that kind of prayer. And friends, if you are praying that kind of prayer and you find yourself slipping down a road where you are spending most of your time trying to discredit those who might be speaking a truth, call them fact checkers if you'd like. If you are spending your time trying to discredit others who are speaking a truth that is inconvenient or even pokes at your soul, then, my friends, pray harder, because there's something in there for you, for me, for us. If we do not say our prayers, if we do not do the hard work, if we do not hear and see Jesus standing in the doorway saying, "I've come to set you free." And by the way, every ounce, every sentence, every narrative, every story in Mark's gospel is about Jesus trying so hard to set us free. And if we don't go about that hard work, it is natural to know that we then live with the angels of fear. And the angels of fear take us to those places, because those angels of darkness and fear are the angels that are working so hard to hold us in bondage. Who could blame you? Who could blame you in this time for sometimes getting there? To maybe being tempted to live in unbelief and to allowing the angels of fear to overtake us. But friends, no. Now more than ever, Jesus is standing at that door. Now more than ever. Just not some story some couple thousands of years ago. Now. Jesus now is standing at our door, wishing to set us free. And calling us by the name he knows us as. Beloved, disciple, courageous one. By the way, the last chapter of Mark, the one that ends where it ends before the folks later put that other ending on. Dale and I will talk to you about that someday. But the place where the original text, we believe, stops. Pay attention to it. Because after an entire story of Jesus the Liberator going from one place to another place to another place, casting out demons and bringing sight to the blind, and healing the sick, and lifting up the lowly and the oppressed, and after his death, and after his resurrection, which got added on later, the question left in Mark's gospel is, what are you going to do about it? For they were gathered and waiting, but afraid. But afraid. Friends, Jesus is standing at the doors of our hearts, calling us by the name that we were created to be. Beloved one, courageous one, disciple, apostle, healer, reconciler, justice maker, peacemaker. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Amen.